One of the reasons the energy sector is such a fascinating space to explore and build a business in is that it sits at the intersection of politics, technology, corporate strategy, and everyday life. When we look at utility-scale project development, it isn't an industry operating in isolation to manufacture a product or deliver a service. It involves physical infrastructure being embedded into the natural and the built environment. And that changes everything. And when we look at the business models that operate within this sector, it's not simple transactions between one company and one customer all the time. It's often a complex web of homeowners, landowners, local councils, businesses, regulators, and the central government. And each of these stakeholders, as they're known, have a different set of needs, vulnerabilities, and desires with regard to an energy project being built. And they're all capable of influencing whether or not it actually goes ahead. Now, for an energy developer, success depends on more than just the capability of their engineering team, or even how well the project aligns with the current government's climate goals. It requires bringing as many of these stakeholders as possible into alignment with a coherent vision. Without that alignment, councillors might withhold consent, residents can protest about the perceived threat to their property values or the landscape, and politicians might even fail to see how a project supports their mandate or their constituency's priorities. And for myself as an entrepreneur entering this sector as a filmmaker, I'm particularly interested in how narrative, trust, and perception intersect with policy and the actual technicalities of building energy infrastructure. Now, at the centre of all of this is communication. Clarity about what's being built, precision about who needs to be persuaded, and discipline in choosing the channels and the language that resonates with each audience. And this is where communication strategy becomes absolutely vital. So on today's episode of CleanTalk, we're going to be speaking to Peter Elms, who's the co-founder and director of the UK's leading communications agency and net zero infrastructure. In this episode, we're going to dive into the hidden politics of renewable energy planning. We're going to explore loss aversion, institutional distrust, the role that councillors have to play, and why net zero as language can be tricky to use in certain constituencies. We'll also examine how public opinion, perception, and trust often shape planning outcomes just as much as technical merit or policy compliance. Later in today's episode, we'll turn to what this all means for renewable energy storytelling and film. In a sector where reputational risk is carefully managed and communications are closely scrutinised, we'll explore how documentaries, case studies, and first-person testimonies fit into that landscape, and where campaigns can move beyond loosely defined impact to deliver measurable commercial value. If you work in renewable energy planning, development, communications, or investment, this conversation will offer a clearer view of the forces that often determine whether projects advance or stall. If you want to better understand why technically sound, policy-aligned energy projects don't always translate into approval, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to speak with me. We always like to start off with a little bit about our guests' past to kind of paint a picture of who they are and why they found themselves in this industry. Can you take us back?
I studied history at university in London. Always had an interest in politics. And if I'm honest, didn't really know what I wanted to do. So you look at all the different grad schemes and you think, it doesn't sit quite right for me. Wanted to work in politics, far too young and not competent enough. And that applies now to be a politician myself. So I wanted to work in and around it. I was a Labour Party member and ended up working for a Labour MP. Absolutely fascinating, just being around Westminster, meeting people involved in politics, the policy meets popularity contest, really got the bug for it. And that then led to my involvement in lobbying, which is the typical next step. It's the corporate version of politics. And as a result of which, did that for about 10 years, working with people like Tesco, helping them to get stores built, learning all about how to handle clients. I guess it's the commercialization of politics, which is perhaps not a pretty way of putting it,
sure.
But it's business meets politics. And those two things I find very interesting.
Yeah.
And I eventually found my way started my own agency once I discovered the niche and what it was exactly I wanted to do.
Outside of like the B2B context, lobbying can be a bit of a dirty word. What don't people understand about the lobbying landscape and the integral role it plays?
Lobbying is essential in a democracy. The word lobbying is unpopular, but we all lobby one way or another. So if you want the country to change and you speak to a politician about it and you say, this bothers me, you are in effect lobbying.
Okay.
A lot of lobbying is conducted by people that wouldn't call themselves lobbyists, but they are lobbying. So for this audience, Greenpeace are an incredibly effective lobbying organization at scale internationally. Most people wouldn't have a problem with that. I think what people don't like, and I agree with this, is disproportionate advantage given to money in order to shape the public sphere in accordance with private interest.
Right.
That is a problem. The way to combat that is to make, obviously, you're not allowed to give money to people to inform politics. That's illegal. You make that illegal. But also transparency. I think the only way to combat things that you don't like is bringing it into the light and ensuring that people can see what's going on and then saying, no, we don't like that. We'll get rid of that politician as a result and let democracy work. But the idea that business or interest shouldn't engage with politicians is not democratic.
Okay.
We call it engagement. So we engage with politicians on behalf of our clients, and they have a right as much as anybody else does to make their case.
Yeah.
And they use organizations like us to make it as effectively as possible.
Going into the niching process, we've come out of renewable energy.
Yeah.
What was before that? What was the process?
That's quite a big question and comes back to sort of our business values and what I think works for a business. But if I make it personal for a moment, I was working lobbying, helping people like Tesco build big stores, but it was all anchored in helping people get planning consent.
Right. Yeah.
So property lobbying is a specific niche of the lobbying industry. So lobbying, typically you want to help someone change the law, but there's a small part of it that focuses on helping developers get planning consent.
Okay.
Because in the UK, that's a democratic process, and therefore there'll be a lobbying industry attached to it. So I was doing a lot of that, helping house builders build lots of houses, but I was also doing a reasonably small amount of work on renewables, helping anaerobic digestion, it was at the time. Energy from waste, essentially. Doing a bit of that work and enjoying it more than I was the other parts of my job. And really, what happened, Alpaca came about simply because there was one particular project that I enjoyed. I met my business partner, a guy called Nick Leaney, on that project. And the long story short is that we decided that his technical expertise from a planning perspective, married with my, in inverted commas, comms expertise for renewables and development, there's a business there. And it wasn't an area that was niched at the time within the sector. You got a lot of property lobbying firms, but nothing related directly to renewables. So it was work that I enjoy and that had an element of feel good to it, but but a commercial focus at the same time. What we didn't know at the time that was probably, so this is 2015, 2016, was that was probably the worst time to start a business like ours. And without going into too much depth, there was a massive change in the policy environment, which meant that something called feed-in tariffs stopped. And so the commercial reality for developing, let's say, a large solar farm changed. But what, the good news is that after about 5 years in the wilderness, declaration of net zero climate emergency by Theresa May met falling cost of renewables more broadly. So solar panels, for example, much cheaper, battery technology, all moved on, meant that there was institutional investment and there was a lower cost to deliver these projects. And all of a sudden a market existed for a business like ours that, a bit like Bubba Gump's shrimp boat in Forrest Gump, had been sort of out and about looking for shrimp for quite some time and then found ourselves probably the only boat out there at the right time.
Got it. You talking about your relationship with your co-founder. How did you make that work? It's always a challenge to kind of find out who's got which skill set, particularly in the early stages when you're wearing so many hats anyway.
Yeah.
How did you, build up a way of, delegating to each other, really?
A lot of people say that when you pick a business partner, it's a bit like you should take it as seriously as a marriage, right? So I guess Nick and ours was a bit more of a shotgun marriage. But it's worked out really well. And, we get on well with each other and it's always been useful to the business, our relationship. What's different about us is that Nick isn't involved in the day-to-day running of the business. He runs an entirely separate business, but has a strategic role within our business. Yeah. So what he's been brilliant at is allowing me to form the business, make all the mistakes and not stop me doing that, and had a lot of patience. And that eventually we like to think, touch wood, it's come good.
Yeah. You talked there about the timing of the business, niching down, all these things having to line up just right for it to work.
Yeah.
When you did find that flow and you gained some traction, what did what did it look like to kind of develop some growth within the business?
Well, it looked good. It was definitely a relief. Timing's really important. So by that, I mean, there's got to be a market for what you're selling. And if there isn't a market for what you're selling, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're not going to do very well. And I think for the early years of the business, I don't know if this speaks to anyone out there that's working away at something that isn't perhaps quite ticking along as they want it to. Often it's just, you're probably going after the wrong thing. And my issue was that we were going after the right thing at the wrong time. When the timing improved, and as outlined, that really was institutional investment and the declaration of climate emergency. Those two things coming together with our current skill set, it married up. Now, that did require us to stay true to niche. And what happened in the wilderness years, if we call them that, was that you have to find other niches or other work that you can do to survive.
Yeah.
You got to survive, right? But there comes a point where you're going to have to make a choice between survival and doubling down. And that comes with risk and will upset people that you work with. And it's easy to say, but it's definitely been something I'm now married to.
Yeah. When we look at the renewable energy industry, you've got all these different stakeholder groups having to coordinate. It's very messy and complicated. And there's lots of political influence. There's lots of commercial influence. Where does your kind of communications products or services come into this, and how do they help solve specific problems?
Yeah, so obviously we work in a policy environment that has very big communications considerations, right? You've got to convince the country that net zero is a good idea. You've then got to, and then you've got to get people to change their behavior, take the bins out, etc., put the rubbish in the right color. But if I bring it to what we do, which is so as concerns energy, and we do work outside of energy, more like a utilities company, energy, water, data, but they're all very connected to energy. If you look at what we do, we have to help renewable energy developers get planning consent for projects. So what stakeholders are relevant to that? You've got the decision makers. So in the UK, you've got a room full of elected representatives, councillors that need to put their hands up and vote for your project if you want to get it through. So they're obviously really important, right? Then you've got the general public and those that are most impacted by development. And they're really important too, because they're going to be very interested in what it is you're doing if you're doing it near to where they live.
Yeah.
So if you consider that you've got the general public as one stakeholder group, politicians as another stakeholder group, but then you've got the technocrats, you've got planning officers that have to sit in between those and advise councillors. Our clients are big stakeholders. They're super important too. And they'll all have slightly different motivations. But your question was, how does that all work? Well, ultimately, and I'll keep this very simple, politicians care what the general public think, because without their support, they don't have jobs.
Okay, yep.
So if they feel that it's an unpopular thing and they are likely to lose their seat, and at ward council level, don't forget, they're not losing income, it's more power, or however they frame it. If they feel that they're going to lose that, they're going to be very sensitive. So there's a real interplay between that sort of PR piece for the general public and what we would consider lobbying more classically for ward councillors.
Excellent. What do your kind of communications campaigns or projects look like?
Yeah.
How are they structured? You've got these stakeholder groups. How are you engaging them?
I've told you about the relationship between those two parties. So between the local population and councillors.
Yeah.
So you need to, if you can understand that councillors care about what the general public think, then you need to ensure that the general public see your project in its best light. So you could look at this as well, then simply you need to convince everyone in the area that it's a really good idea. And then ward councillors will think, okay, well, then we'll vote for it. But it's not that simple. So ultimately, if we just break down that experience of a renewable energy project for someone that lives locally.
Yeah.
If I'm going to build a wind farm or a solar farm near to your house, Luke, no matter what you think about the climate crisis, you're going to be loss averse. Right? So this is leaning on behavioural science, which is a large part of our job, or behavioural economics, I guess. You're going to think, well, I'm losing my view. What do I get out of it? And it's going to be very difficult for me to ever convince you that it's a good idea. A large part of my job is finding the people that might support a project and motivating them to support it and let their ward councillors know. With the ward councillors and the political sphere, it's making sure that they've got the right information and that we are answering the questions that they're being put at them and the concerns that are being put at them with data that they can use to make an informed decision. But ultimately, I think if you're a typical project lifespan for us will be 6 months, I think, are you going to be able to change and rewire the way that humans think within that period? I think is a harder ask than actually just going out there and finding people that might support the project, giving them the power to do so. And I think that's a far better use of budget and time for developers.
Yeah. That portion of the, I guess, the voting power, if you wanted to call it that.
Yeah.
What tools are you using to engage them and get them on board intellectually and emotionally?
So if you imagine you arrive at an area and the first thing you've got to do is tell everyone what's going on. If you think a business like ours, our job is to introduce or launch a project. Now, obviously, with certain categories of stakeholders, you do things at different times. If I keep it really simple, first impressions in any walk of life are really important. So your first opportunity to tell people what's going to happen locally is super important. The way I think developers and the sector and perhaps just anyone in general, when they're promoting something, the mistake that they make is that they go, what we need to do here is tell people about the benefits of the project, the amount of renewable energy that's going to produce, carbon, the jobs. We say, these are the benefits. Might even one day bring your energy prices down. No one will believe you. But you can say all of those things. And then you hope that that will outweigh on the scale the concerns that they might have about the way it's going to look from your garden. And if you tell them often enough about the good things, that will outweigh the bad things. The problem is that, and I touched upon it briefly, is that there is this deep-seated lack of trust with people that do my job, lack of trust, i.e. the people that are telling the story, lack of trust with developers that will have a financial incentive to be able to do something, lack of trust in political institutions, full stop. And so people are coming to the table already with a filter for the information that they're giving you. So that's problem one. The second one is, if you're losing something, it's a far more powerful motivator to drive how you perceive a problem. So your loss of property, perceived loss of property value, view, etc., is emotionally far more deep-seated than me saying, well, have you considered the amount of carbon that's going to offset? And I think once you understand that how powerful loss aversion is, you start to do our job better. So how does that look in practice? We understand, based on the data that we receive, we've worked on over 200 renewable energy projects, spoken to thousands of people, that all the same themes come up all time and time over. Loss of view, etc. But what people will recognize is that the benefits are really important, but they don't see those as being tangible or real. And there's a simple way for comms professionals when they're dealing with these projects is to make those benefits real. Quite a naff thing to say, but also to make them feel that if they don't do this, they're going to lose out on something that they do believe is valuable. You need to marry loss aversion with the benefits that you're communicating.
You want like a push motivator and a pull motivator sort of thing.
100%. So essentially, you want to say, look, if there is an economic benefit, it equates to this much. Let's call it £5 million for a project. And you say you will lose those jobs. You will lose that economic uplift. You'll lose the ability to be, a high growth zone if you don't take upon this opportunity. Rather than, if you support this, you're going to offset X, because that's just not as powerful enough message. Now, whether that can ever outweigh some of those people that are perhaps the real losers in a project, if they believe that their view from their garden is more important than those other values, that's fine. You just need to go out and find the people that, that middle area of people. So there are three types of people that will support it regardless, people that I don't have an opinion yet or might, and people that never will. Don't waste too much of your time in practice focusing on the people that never will. And that really applies to any political campaign that's been known forever, which is why there's a big focus on something called getting out the vote in politics, which is finding your supporters and making sure they turn up and vote. And really that should be a large part of, well, it is a large part of our job.
Do you think the politicization of renewable energy is a net positive or a net negative to the progress overall?
I think it would be easier for planning consultants, for people that pull together planning applications.
Yeah.
They like to be able to say, we align with policy. These are all the benefits. And then they get a recommendation for approval from the technocrats, from the civil servants. And then there would not be a political decision because they basically have an algorithm that would work out whether it aligns with policy and therefore it gets voted through. When you talk about politicalization, what you're really meaning is, should we remove emotional decision-making from the process of renewables? And I think that really is underpinning the value of democracy and what people want from their lives. Like, you can't say to someone, would you rather have panels in a field or open space to be able to walk your dog? So ultimately, what makes living in a democracy interesting is that you have agency and the ability to decide upon those things. But I think what you're probably getting at is, do I think the current political narrative around renewables is helping? No. Because what we've seen is a real gear change over the last 2 or 3 years, that net zero in particular, that language is a wedge issue being used by populist political movements more broadly to gain support in the country. So therefore, if something's popular, like bashing net zero and some of the arguments around why it shouldn't be a thing, then of course, if you're turning up and saying, I've got a project here and the key benefit is net zero, it doesn't help.
The political angle is so integral to your process and the value you provide your clients.
Yeah.
I guess, how would you want to see the public's relationship with energy improve over time, particularly in their, political leanings?
I think I'm probably agnostic to what I want people to think and feel. I would like political decisions to be informed as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a very strong argument for why we need more renewable energy. And I think energy security and control of our own energy resources is invaluable to a lot of the things that I think make people quite unhappy.
Right.
So therefore, I think that there is a very strong case to be made for renewable energy as an abundant resource versus fossil fuels, for example. So I think in and of itself, for me personally, I think that's a good thing.
Mm.
I don't tell clients how to think either, but it would be helpful for my business if that were to be the case, an obvious bias.
Yeah.
What would I like to see politicians do to help? Perhaps might be a helpful way to frame it. We've done some research recently around reform.
Mm-hmm.
So in the UK at the moment, Reform are a party surging up the polls, and it's looking at the minute, where are we now? Start of 2026, that there's a very real chance that we'll have Nigel Farage as Prime Minister and Reform running the country. I think that's problematic because they're anti-net zero, anti-renewable energy, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's wrong. And also the business case for it for my business is problematic.
Sure.
To be fair to Ed Miliband, I do think there's a move away from language surrounding net zero to energy security.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that...
So is that something that he's done, or that...
You can hear it when he speaks now. He talks about cost of living and trying to align it with the energy debate,
mm-hmm.
etc.
So what we're seeing there is we're trying to change the buzzwords that we're using to stop the public from immediately switching off, basically.
It is greater than buzzwords, though, because the words themselves or the stories that we tell ourselves are very closely aligned to the way that we see the world.
Mm-hmm.
If your life frame is all about security and improving the life of my family, net zero is abstract. If you're someone that believes that the world's a better place if we all work together, so those are the two classic frames to make it really simple.
Sure.
Then there's an argument that the world should get together and net zero should happen, etc. But
mm-hmm.
for that first category, if you're talking about security, far more important. For that sort of authoritarian leaning, typically right wing way of looking at the world,
mm-hmm.
there are very strong arguments made for renewable energy that should align there. The real problem, though, so we ran research on Reform voters and what they think about net zero.
Yep.
Should we be in Reform-leaning areas where we're trying to build a wind farm, solar farm, battery? Should we be talking about net zero, or should we be talking about energy security, biodiversity? So we ran a national poll only at Reform voters. And yes, there are certain nuances that they prefer. So yeah, you might get 3 to 4% of people thinking that energy security is a better way to be, they're quite into that versus net zero, which was universally disliked. But the real problem was, it's not so much the message, it was the medium. So what I personally think, and the data suggests, is that it's actually just a complete loss of trust within the political class. And that's really depressing, because if you can make the right argument, but you're the wrong person to be making it, that's harder to fix.
Yeah.
Right? And if you've got all the political parties are suffering from a lack of trust, and then perversely we're granting trust to a party without track record, well, that's high risk.
On that note of mediums, we're going to explore a bit about social media and, the challenges that presents and also the opportunities. Yeah. Can you unpack a bit your
sure.
take on that, on the social media landscape?
I think social media for us, if we go back to what I do for a living, what the company does, it helps planners or renewable energy developers get consent for projects. Often what we're told, or our assumptions are, is that unlock the younger demographic, they're more pro renewables,
right?
Find them, motivate them to support the application, might lead to a better outcome for the project, might get you consent. And social media is often considered the vehicle for doing so, because digital native, if you're a digital native when you're younger, you're more likely to be using social media, et cetera, et cetera. It's not that simple. So social media, if you think social media by its very nature is a problematic medium for delivering positive change. Now, again, that's quite a big statement.
And I think I grasp what you're saying.
Yeah. So, and that's based on a couple of things I think that drive that. One is a tendency towards a negativity bias.
Yeah.
So bad news is we're more receptive to it. And to bring that to life, for example, after on my walk home or walk back to the office over London Bridge, I'll probably be focused more on the couple of things I'd rather said more clearly than the other things that I might be more happy with.
Yeah.
We tend to, and definitely when you're trying to run a business as well, you don't celebrate milestones because they tend to make you compare yourself to others over a similar time period, and you wish just it's the quickest way to be unhappy. So we've got this, and that's all designed to stop us doing things that make our lives worse, right? So if we feel bad about something, then we're likely to adjust our behavior far more than feeling good. Therefore, our brains tick more to that negative messaging. So if you're trying to build a solar farm and someone says it's going to catch fire, there's something in us that says that there might be something in that. I've then talked about the trust issue, that it's harder for developers or people with people in my profession, politicians, to cut through because it's just harder. Then meets what I'd call the second real problem, which is, and again, I don't want to sound like I really know what I'm talking about here, but my headline understanding is that it's system one thinking, right?
Okay.
System one thinking is that headline reading, gut-led analysis of media that we take on. So I'm pretty good at system one. I have to be because I work in comms, but a very technical person, a lawyer working a case, would have done system two thinking, which is a deep dive into the issue, the problem. Will have to do an analysis because it's got to stand up in court, for example. But if you think social media encourages system one thinking, which we prefer to system two because it's easier. So headline reading, understanding of issues and understandings meets negativity bias. You've then got a platform and an algorithm that recognizes that's what people want and feed it. Then it's not an inherently easy place for people like me to do business. That said, there are ways to make it work for you once you understand that that's the playground.
Okay.
And if you want to play in it, then they're the rules. Otherwise, you're going to get ignored and you're not going to have too much cut through. So social media, I think, broadly speaking, is useful, but really problematic for many of our clients, many of our projects.
I'd love to dive a bit more into the kinds of organizations you work with. For me, my passion and my focus is to tell stories around renewable energy and move more into sort of the documentary and case study formats. Can you just unpack some of your experiences, what you've learned working with these developers?
If I was to speak to a developer about storytelling, that would be a challenge for them.
Sure.
Because I think most of our clients, they've got a deadline and a very clear outcome that they're looking to achieve.
Yeah.
So they're interested in influence and they're interested in results. The art of it, definitely less so. But what they're really keen on is, and I think this is what's interesting now about storytelling, is that never has there been a time where we've had more data, readily accessible access to data. And at the same time, never has it been able to easier to produce content. Your work at the moment is fascinating because it's all part of the birth of new media. This, breakup of the totemic pillars of where we all used to get our news.
Yeah.
And so there's a real opportunity. Developers would definitely recognize that we should be storytelling in 2026
sure.
or communicating in 2026 is how I'd frame it. Telling people what we think, where they are, and using the tools of today. But I think what they would want, so some of the larger organizations we work with, so people like Total or SSE, people that have very big established reputations that they spend a lot of money looking after, and have garnered those reputations over decades, they will expect you to have that front of mind when you're out there campaigning. So you can't overpromise. You can't do what NIMBYs can. So people that oppose projects.
Yeah.
We can't say, well, we'll just do this for you and then not deliver on that. So I would say there's a real great responsibility with those brands in particular and the way that we handle their reputation. I think storytelling will be seen by those guys as, or for many organizations, as inherently risky.
Yeah.
Because we work in a really volatile, reputational risk area, right? People don't like what you're doing, and therefore it's a priori not a good thing for your reputation.
Understanding where my services as a filmmaker fit into different industries and what formats, because the format is such a big piece in storytelling. Like, I've done event content, I've done some brand films and mission films, that sort of thing. Podcasting, all sorts of different formats. And obviously the format often dictates the relationship with the client or the partner.
Yeah.
If you wanted to take an example as a sort of a purist artist, it would be, let's make a documentary about renewable energy. We'll get a company that has a vested interest in the growth of the sector to fund it. And that creates the project structure, if you will, to actually go out and make your film.
Yeah.
You've got other approaches where it's like, okay, I want to tell stories about energy, so I want to do marketing content, so case studies. You look at the development of a wind farm or a solar farm and telling stories around that. That would be more of a marketing piece. I guess from your experience, again, with that risk aversion and understanding the nature of the brands and their reputations, how do you kind of see the way the different formats play into different opportunities?
Let's set aside marketing material, right?
Sure.
Because my business is grubbier than that. We're in the trenches trying to campaign for specific outcomes.
Yeah.
So from a marketing perspective and portrayal of brand, etc., I can totally understand the value of video content. What I've seen that's worked really well, or what I believe works really well, and I think video is the most powerful medium. It's more powerful than just a couple of sound bites or an article. Video is very important. If it's telling stories, if it's giving voice to people that are located, or an authentic voice for the project.
Okay.
So if it evidences what I'm telling people. So if and by I mean the company, the brand, etc. But if I'm telling you, there'll be job opportunities, there will be, the local farmer will be able to graze sheep. Everyone will think, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Right? It's very simple, ultimately, a lot of this. Whereas if I can evidence a local employer saying, actually, we've had a solar farm built here 2-3 years ago and hardly noticed it's there. And actually, some of the economic benefits that has been talked about have felt like they've come true. And there's been some great work on a campaign called Solar Shepherds, where it gave voice to landowners talking about how they graze their sheep under panels. So it makes real some of the claims that I'm making.
Yeah.
But I guess at its most powerful would be, I live opposite a solar farm. I was really concerned about it. And here I am telling you that I was a bit stressed over nothing. Or it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, which are terrible messages to write down on a leaflet or a piece of comms. But if you're listening to someone actually saying that, really powerful. There should be more of that.
Got it. You work with a lot of developers in the renewable space. What are you seeing come up? What are the key themes that you're engaging with in that sort of clientele?
Developers, they're used to employing people like us to help make their case at a local level and to de-risk the planning process. Developers are used to quite a formulaic consultation process, which is a word I haven't used too much, but it's effectively the planning process should work that you go out and ask people's opinions and shape projects to meet their needs and requirements.
Yeah.
Problem most of our developers face is that the feedback they receive is we don't want it here.
Right.
But I think there's a real opportunity as a developer to make the kind of arguments that we wish our politicians were.
Yeah.
And have a level of agency and opportunity that politicians don't have. So what do I mean by that? I think the opportunity is there's never been easy access to data to inform the way that we do our jobs. We no longer just need to turn up in the village hall and stand in front of a group of people and get shouted at and be on the back foot. There are ways to make your case in a positive way that makes you feel empowered rather than just feel like you're going through a 13-week process of apologizing to everyone you meet. And I think I've touched upon this throughout our conversation, but there are ways that developers can feel empowered and make the case for their business, for their day-to-day jobs, for what it is they're trying to deliver in an unapologetic way, because I don't think that they should be apologizing for what they're trying to achieve. I think ultimately renewable energy development is invaluable and therefore very important. They need a bit of guidance with regards to messaging, because I think a lot of them, for the ones that perhaps we're not working with, will feel like every project that they go to, they're receiving the same kickback. And to them, I'd say, if you're doing the same thing over and over again, you can't not expect a different outcome.
Yeah.
But there are different ways to do what they're trying to achieve. We know far more now about the people that we're trying to engage. There are far easier ways to get in front. It's never been so easy to find people via the internet or by working with people that will actually get out into the streets and put up a stall and ask people for support. There is creativity within the sector that didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago.
Can you dive a bit more specifically about how you help your clients do this?
We have a 3-phase approach to the way we do our work. One is, first things first, we have to understand the area, understand the local stakeholders. Some of that will be relationship-based, based on relationships that we have, state the obvious. The second one will be research. And we're sat on a lot of data. So we pool our data from across all our projects to understand in real terms what people can expect in terms of local hostility, potentially. Then the second phase of our work is actual engagement. And what you'll often hear people say in our sector is that the earlier the better, which I think is a pretty tried and true way of approaching communications. Start as early as possible talking to people. Don't leave it to the last minute. The sector will know that. Renewable energy developers will know that. I think the big misstep is with regard to messaging and the way that we aren't framing what it is that we are telling people that they are getting.
Right.
And again, and this is me doing my job, repeating things over and over again. That's got to be framed in a way that emotionally resonates with people, i.e. you've got to give people an understanding that they're missing out on something if they don't take advantage of the opportunity that renewables brings, and that there is a cost to not having this development locally.
Yeah.
And then we will do that work, just to explain it more clearly, we do that prior to the submission of a planning application.
Okay.
And then after the submission of an application, we tend to focus on the decision makers more acutely. So those people in the room that are going to be voting for the project.
Yeah.
Because at that point, what the public say and think becomes very relevant. But ultimately, a large part of our job is ensuring that our clients understand what people think about a project.
Yeah.
So push to the side at the moment the idea of influence or political understanding. Often you need to be, I wouldn't go as far as a resident advocate, but definitely someone that says, look, there are people here that are concerned about this element of the project. It is a win for both parties if this is done. So if you set back your panels from this corner, then you will be able to win over the support of this pot of people that are opposed to the application, or you will remove a plank of their argument. And we've been developing tools internally. We can come on to this in a minute as to basically now every agency, every company in the country can effectively be a tech agency, given what's happened with AI and the ability to vibe code. But now we can provide planning consultants and developers with that information in real time.
Right.
So they can see a map where with dots on it, and as a resident engages with the website that explains the project, they click on a dot and say, I don't like this here. The project team can see that dot appear on their screens, tell them precisely what it is and where it is that they've got an issue. And so there's an element of influence, 100%, that comes with the territory if you work in communications. But there's also a part of just saying, this is what people think. Let's respond and adjust project to that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of comms occasionally is like, how can you spin this? What can you do? But ultimately, it's just like, it's doing the right thing and telling people what that thing is. So if we come back, we've talked a lot about the people that oppose a project.
Sure.
And what we haven't touched upon is, okay, so what are you doing with the people that practically over a short period of time, you're not going to be able to get on side? But there's plenty you can do. First of all, you treat them with respect and empathy, and recognize that it's not a hypothetical loss. For some people, that might be real. The view will change. Their ability to enjoy that footpath may well change if it cuts through a renewable energy development. But you've got to allow those people, you can give those people a sense of agency, which they will appreciate. And also just by treating them with respect, answering their questions on time and giving them the information that they need, they will treat you with respect. And the whole process becomes better. It's easier.
Thanks for unpacking that so clearly. We're going to jump now to what we call Quickfire Curiosity, which is our short personal trivia to end off the episode with. What does futurism mean to you?
I like to look ahead and think that things are going to be better. So I've got 3 kids, and I like to think that the future is going to be more interesting than it is now. I get excited by new technology, human progress. I'm not a big one for nostalgia, apart from in my music tastes. I'm concerned sometimes that many people that I speak to have the past as a place that's better than the now. And I think so many things...
The good old days.
Yeah, and I think that's a nonsense. I think my life is more fun than it was for my parents at this age. I think the opportunities are greater than they were for them. And I think it was better for them than it was for their grandparents. Generally speaking, I think things get better. I think it's far too easy to tell ourselves that things have got worse. And it's not something I believe. And I think you have to think like that anyway if you're running a business, that everything is better.
A tad of delusional optimism. Or not even delusional, but
Yeah, just optimism.
Optimism.
Yeah, but also I think evidentially things are better now. Do I think we have the caliber of talent in political office that we had 120 years ago? No, but I think it's a better country to live in than it was 120 years ago. It's easier.
Yeah.
Far nicer, safer.
Yeah, fantastic. If you went back to your younger self when you were coming out of a critical point in education, maybe finishing your first degree or something like that, what advice would you give to that young man?
I think to me specifically, just like, don't worry about it so much. It'll be all right. I think I spent far too much time stressing about career when you realize that really careers are broken down into sort of year by year. What do you want to do? What do you want to do next? And I think trying to get the big picture right is virtually impossible. I haven't solved it now at 41. I don't have any ambition to, but it all kind of works out all right. So I think I spent far too much time stressing and worrying when I was younger.
If you were to speak to someone that's kind of changing career or maybe leaving education, and they had to, what questions would you encourage them to ask themselves to say, to draw out what the best path is for them?
I think, what are you good at and how much money do you want to make? I think asking what makes you happy is not the best question to ask when you're asking, what do you want to do for work and career? Because you can work at something that isn't your passion and still be extremely happy.
Yeah.
And I think you just need to work out on that Venn diagram how much you want of which bit, and it'll work itself out. And then lo and behold, the happiness piece tends to follow being good at something and being able to afford to live.
Yeah, fantastic. Peter, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to learn more about Alpaca Communications and about the development process and some of the complicated hurdles you have to help your clients overcome in that process of development. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Luke.
And thank you for listening into this episode of CleanTalk. If you want to see more episodes, you can click the link to my right. And if you want to find out more about how Harmer Visuals can support you, head over to harmervisuals.com/services to learn more there. Thanks for listening and see you next time.